Hi, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My nephew and his partner just recently returned from a holiday to Tasmania, and his partner's name is Paige, and she became enraptured with the scenery, and they both did, I think, in Tasmania, in the rainforests and whatever. And she's a keen, aspiring photographer. She's got a Nikon DSLR, and someone like me who might be able to teach her how to use it. But she came back very excited about the photos she took over in the forest over in Tasmania. And I thought I would just share today about Tasmania, excuse me. If you haven't been there, you should. It's Australia's island state, and it's got a very interesting history. And originally it was a penal settlement where many convicts were housed there at a place called Port Arthur. But many years ago, when I was first starting out in photography, my wife and I went with our good friends Anne and Dave on a drive yourself holiday around Tasmania. And that's when I had my little Sheikah Minister D, and I started taking slides of Tasmania at the time, and haven't been back since, but I should, because it's just a fantastic place, particularly if you like to take photographs. I'm going to put a link underneath this video to one of my blog posts about that trip that we had in Tasmania and some of the photos I took at the time. So it's such a photogenic place, and it's got its unique band of photographers who have specialised in Tasmania, and I'm going to share I think I've got four book reviews today, maybe 5, I'm not sure, I haven't counted, of some famous Tasmanian photographers. One of them, unfortunately, has passed on, Peter Dombrovkis. I can't pronounce that very well, but you'll see it afterwards anyway when I show you the book. And there's a couple of others there too as well. So I'm going to introduce them as I go through, and I'll just quickly show you. I'm going to put links underneath to some articles about them and their current websites if they're still alive. And I think Peter's the only one that's not, I think, at the moment. So anyway, without further ado, we'll have a look at Peter's book. This book here, this one is a must-have in your photographic collection. It's called Wild Rivers, and actually fetches quite a good price on the second-hand market on the internet if you have a look. And Peter was mentored by a Tasmanian photographer called Owen Trucanus, I think his name was. I'll just hold that there. And he took many photos rafting up and down the wild rivers in Tasmania. And Peter was something of his an understudy, I suppose, and was mentored by Oleg's. And Oleg's, there are 1 or 2 books around featuring his photography. I had a chance to buy one a few years ago and I passed up on it, but I shouldn't have. I should have got it. But anyway, yeah, Oleg's came to a sad end in that, and he was campaigning to save Lake Pedder from being flooded, which is another story you can look up in Tasmania, an iconic inland lake with a beautiful beach, which was flooded for a hydroelectric scheme. And so he was campaigning against that. And unfortunately, he drowned on one of his expeditions in one of the wild rivers when he was kayaking. And I got an idea that Peter Dombroskis might have even found his body at the time. And tragically, Peter himself died in the Tasmanian wilderness a few years back now. He was on a solo trip, as a lot of these photographers used to do, solo trips. And he was found at the base of a cliff in the wilderness in Tasmania. But his work is still being published, and you can buy it, I think. And I'll put some links to some work about him, and you can do an internet search and find all sorts of things about Peter. So this is this book. It's a beautiful book. Can I show you in here? It's got a forward. It's been the text in it is by Bob Brown, who was a politician in Australia and also a keen conservationist, Dr. Bob Brown. And you look at some of the things in here. This is some of the colour and the detail in some of the rocks in the creeks, which are just all burnished over. That's polished quartzite, and very wild rivers. There's a swirling shot there of the rivers going down there, and not too many people go there to these places. And this is the famous Rock Island Bend. Whoops, where are we? Which over there features on the cover of this. I think it's on the cover of this book as well. And that's a well photographed thing, but it's a very wild place and part of the whole deal. What else have we got over here? It's another shot taken in the same area, I think. This is a lovely book, beautiful colour photographs. When you see the erosion in some of the rocks where the rivers have been raging through some of these places and carved out beautiful, smooth sculptures in the rocks, it's quite amazing. I'm just going to read a little bit about, this is just to whet your appetite. I could show you the whole book and go to a website and show you all his work, but I'd rather you did that. I'm just going to say a little bit about what he wrote in the back of the book, and also about what he took the photographs on. And this was him writing, and of course he's passed on now. He died in 1972. Sorry, he didn't die in 1972. This guy we're talking about, Oleg's. This book began almost 20 years ago when, as a teenager, I was introduced to rivers and canoeing by Gus Trucanus. Over the next decade, as weekends and holidays allowed, I made many river journeys, often in the company of 3 or 4 friends. For a few days or perhaps 2 weeks at a time, we moved in a glittering, sun-splashed world where living assumed a clarity and intensity unknown in ordinary city-bound existence. Our bodies became attuned to rock and rapid. Our senses eagerly absorbed the roar of whitewater, the silent greens of the rainforest. My steadily growing skill at negotiating obstacles bolstered my self-confidence and eased the shyness of adolescence. On many of these trips, Olegus was our mentor and inspiration, an artist in living who led by example and lived life to the full. He died in 1972. The rivers we canoed were the joyful summer counterpart of skiing in winter and mountain walks in autumn and spring. The thought never occurred to that one day the rivers might cease to exist, just as it seemed impossible that Lake Pedder would be obliterated. Yet one by one, the rivers we had known disappeared, their forests drowned, their rushing waters trapped behind grey concrete walls. Quite suddenly, it seemed those carefree years had come to an end, and that's been an ongoing thing. In fact, in my link to my blog, you'll see a picture of the Gordon River Dam, which is also one of those dams that happened. Interestingly enough, at the moment, they are talking about restoring Lake Pedder to its original condition. That's causing a bit of controversy because it cost a lot of money, but that'll be fantastic. In this other book I'm going to show you, there are some pictures of the lake before it was flooded. So Peter's saying here, all the photographs were taken with a Linhof Master Technica on 5x4 Ektachrome E6 film. The book was printed in Singapore by Tianhua Press in fine screen, 200 lines per inch lithographic process on a Heidelberg Speedmaster press. The colour separations were made with a Hell Chromograph DC350ER electronic scanner. Paper used was satin tone matte for the colour section and Brigadoon Scots Grey for the text section. He goes on about that, and probably you need to get the book or have a look at all his work, and then you'll find out more about all of that as well. Peter was born of Latvian parents in Germany at the end of the Second World War and came as a refugee to Australia in 1959. Most of his life has been spent in Tasmania, where for the past 5 years, he has worked as a wilderness photographer. He used a large format camera to record his favourite schemes, landscape and detail. Over the past 20 years, he has travelled down many of the Tasmania's western rivers. Each year, he publishes a selection of his photograph in the Tasmanian Wilderness Calendar. Now, I had one of those calendars, beautiful big large enlargements of his photographs. I don't know whether I got rid of it or sold it or gave it away, but I wish I still had it. I'll have to have a look. I lose things in here. I have to have a look because that was a beautiful book. So that's Peter. His name is spelt Dombrovskis. Peter. This next guy is not far behind him in being famous in Tasmania as a photographer. His name is Richard Bennett, and he's southwest Tasmania is a bit the same area where a lot of these guys take photographs because it's such an incredible wilderness. And he is also a famous yachting photographer. And the Sydney Hobart yacht race, if you go to his website, I'll put a link there. There's an article there about 50 years of photographing the Sydney Hobart yacht race and many other things, but he's also a very good photographer of Tasmania. And a lot of the same sort of shots that Peter was doing, you'll see in this book too. In Tasmania, there's a lot of tannin and it gives you this orange glow in the water, tannin in the waters there. And you see that time and time again. I should have looked up this one of Lake Pedder for you. Just hang on a second and see if I can find it. I'm not going too well. Yes, I am. Here I are. So here, I'll just hold this up. That's that picture at the top there with the man standing on the beach. That's Lake Pedder Beach in the old days. And that's all been flooded and underwater now. And that was just a beautiful, pristine beach. And that's some of the flats that were just near there. For some years, he was one of the people in charge of the, there's some more stuff trekking through the mountains there. Family hikes and all that sort of stuff. But you can see some of the rugged beauty of Tasmania in these pictures here. So he's a really good photographer. He was for many years involved in the administration of the Australian Institute of Professional Photography, which is now unfortunately ceased to be. It's not there anymore. And it was a premier organisation for supporting professional photographers in the old days. I toyed with the idea of joining it as an associate because I wasn't a full-time professional photographer, and I had contact with a lot of people who were involved in the AIPP, but unfortunately and sadly it is now no more. So it's everyone for himself now. In some ways it was a bit like that in the old days. You could still get work even if you weren't a member. So that's Richard Bennett. This other man I came across, and there's an article about him. He's Dennis Harding, and there's an article about him on my blog, which I'll put a link through there. I discovered a couple of his books in a secondhand shop a while ago, and he's a brilliant photographer, A Tasmanian Wilderness Experience by Dennis Harding. And he's still active. He's got a beautiful website, lots of work there. And once again, you can see some of the beautiful photography in these places. It's a very rugged place, Tasmania. I love juggling around trying to show you these things. And he's produced a number of books. And here's some of the, in the forests, you can see the wet forests and the rainforest there and the ferns. Tasmania is rich in ferns and caves and running rivers, and just a beautiful place, particularly if you want to do photography. And there are lots of beautiful waterfalls. One of the most famous waterfalls is the Russell Falls in the Mount Field National Park, which is one of the two oldest national parks in Tasmania. So that's Dennis Harding. I do have another. I found a little A Tasmania, A Place to Remember. That's a little book I found. which is one of his as well. And that's a little potted book with lots of great photos and a lot more of the towns and things in that one as well. Besides the wilderness, there's some beautiful cities in Tasmania, Hobart and Launceston for a start. And they are beautiful places to visit, and lots of interesting old colonial architecture to photograph there too. So that was Dennis Harding. There'll be a link to him. What have we got here now? This one here, Owen Hughes. And that's called Island of Tranquility. And this is a beautiful book too. He was a master of photography. I think he's still going. And this is a lot more of the, it's got the rustic shots in it as well, but also some of the cities. And this is a general all-rounder type book. And Mount Wellington, Hobart is the capital. And that rainbow there is taken from up on the top of Mount Wellington. In the shot, the one without the rainbow, that is showing, looking up, I think that's looking up to Mount Wellington from Hobart. And it's quite an interesting drive up to the top of Mount Wellington, and a beautiful view when you get up there. And that was the first place I ever saw snow, I think, when we went there in 1973. And it's a bit of a treacherous place, Tasmania, because if you're in the wilderness in Tasmania, it doesn't matter what time of the year, it might be hot one minute and then you've got a blizzard coming in the next minute. So you've got to be very careful and prepare well when you are traveling in Tasmania. So that's Owen Hughes, and he is a great photographer. He says at least 90, a lot of these guys didn't start with digital, they all started with film. He says at least 95% of the photographs in this book have been shot in the last 12 months, that was a while ago, and nearly all on Fuji Velvia 100 or 50 ASA transparency film. The cameras I use are a Pentax 6x7, Pentax 645N, Hasselblad X-Pan and Canon EOS, the same gear as I use for my wedding and portrait photography. I rarely use filters, except for an 81B to make the colours a little warmer, and a polarising filter on some subjects, particularly where water is a major part of the scene, such as in the photographs shown on page 50 and 51 and 67. None of these photographs have been digitally enhanced. He's also a popular wedding photographer as well. So he's a man after my heart. I come from that background. So there'll be links underneath to these guys and their work. And just this one here, there's lots of little sort of sketchbooks that people have done in in Australia, by artists, actual visual artists who use a pen and pencil and whatever and paints, but also many take photographs and then they print them in sepia. This is by David Westlake and Shirley Westlake. And this is old Tasmania in sepia. And they focus on some of the, like that's the old, at Port Arthur, there's this old church at Port Arthur where the prison was. And so they've taken photographs and put them in sepia and then put some text about them. Watermill, Presbyterian Church at Stanley, that's another coastal seaside town in Tasmania. At Stanley, there's this huge structure or prominent landmark at the end of the beach called the Nut, and they call it the Nut at Stanley. So you better look that one up and have a look at photographs of the Nut at Stanley. And I never went there, so this nut was never at Stanley. So there you go. So that's just to give you a little bit of a taste about Tasmania, and to encourage you to go there and have a holiday, depending on where you live, of course. It might be a bit far from other parts of the world, but it's a wonderful place for holidays. Back in 1973, we drove our little Toyota Corona around the island. We had an 8-day drive yourself trip. We went over there on the boat. We had to leave from Melbourne, drive from Adelaide to Melbourne, and then put our little car, our Toyota 1969 Toyota Corona on the boat, and then drive around Tasmania for 8 days. And it was a wonderful trip. But you sort of, one of the places you can't, you look at things on a map in Tasmania, excuse me, and you think, oh, well, that won't take us too long to get there. But we went off on one little shortcut, we thought, and we through the forest, and to our dismay, we suddenly found that it was a road that was mostly mud and mainly used by logging trucks. And we were stuck in this, driving for about 30 miles in first gear only, trying not to slide off the side of the road into the ditch. And it was quite challenging. It might be a little bit better now, but who knows? Tasmania is an interesting place. So there you go. I hope you found that interesting. Look up the links underneath. And Australia is a beautiful place. If you've never been here, come and take some photos, not only in Tasmania, but on the mainland. In South Australia, we have our smaller version of Tasmania called Kangaroo Island, which in some ways is a bit like Tasmania, but a lot smaller, and just as, and it's one of the world's best kept secrets, in my opinion. So there you go. Thanks for watching and listening, and subscribe if you wish, and like if you like, and I'll see you next time.